past participants would have for the endeavor, which is JET. But how do you pull that together? Goodwill enough simply doesn't do it. People move, people get married, people go on to different jobs. So when you have your infrastructure tied to personalities and tied to structures other than these agreed upon core values, it's very difficult to gain momentum and have sustainability. So that brief introduction, I want to just do a little straw poll. Does that seem to somewhat resemble where some of your conversations have been and some of your ideas about recruiting new members and sustaining members? How about a show of hands on that? Okay, so I'm close on some of these things. My hope would be that we could take a couple moments and take a look at a framework that Kyle and Ryan and Matt from Claire that we talked a little bit about. And here's what I've learned in Alumni Association work that I think is transferable. You're going to have to inform us whether or not you agree it's fully transferable. But what I learned was, as much as the alumni of the University of Washington were passionate about what they wanted to do, the social fellowship, the community, the interactions that they had amongst themselves, what we learned was, unless the university itself was extremely clear about what its goals for their alumni, what those goals were, if they weren't clear about that, it really didn't matter all that much what the alums wanted, because the alums didn't have a bridge to the university value. The president of the university, the administration of the university, if they didn't value what we were doing, it was superfluous and irrelevant to the life of the university. As soon as we were able to understand what's the university's core goals and how can we help support those, all of a sudden the conversation changed. And the university looked over and said, you know what? Maybe we could use that support. Maybe that could help us. Maybe your efforts with legislative advocacy could help our agenda. Maybe your work with admissions could help us recruit new and different populations. Maybe your work in communities of color could help us expand our diversity outreach. All of a sudden, the university started thinking of the Alumni Association as an asset, not a burden. When I asked the new president of the University of Washington 4 years ago what his thoughts about alumni associations were, he was the chancellor of LSU before he came here, he sat for a moment and he said, Paul, he said, mainly I was concerned that the Alumni Association didn't embarrass the university. And how true is that? When you think about the stereotypes of alums and alumni associations, tailgate parties and balloons, I mean, there's a lot of fertile ground there for alumni behavior not to mirror the values of the university. Of course, that doesn't happen with the JET alumni, I'm sure. But when we began talking about this, I had a chance to have a chat with Matt over on the East Coast, and we talked a bit about, well, if Claire, in fact, is the parent organization, if we were to set up a transferable paradigm where Claire serves as the university, as the entity that all of you somehow are there to support, to engage, to be connected with, what would those values look like? And Matt, I hope I've captured these correctly, so you can always let me know if I have or haven't.
I hope I expressed them correctly.
All right. So let's start out with one here that I think we all would agree, I hope we would all agree, is a value that Claire has. And when we talked about the role of JET alumni, I was very clear with Matt. Why on earth would JET want to do anything with alums? Because believe me, Alumni Association infrastructure and management is time-consuming, labor-intensive, expensive, inefficient, because at the end of the day, they're all volunteers. When Kyle and I look across the people that we have to work with, we have very little control over the alumni. So how we think about structuring our programs and services has to reflect the fact that at the end of the day, if the alums don't want to play, they don't have to. They can make a different decision. They can go to Facebook, they can go to their own receptions, they can create their own networks, they can work outside of the life of the university if the relationship that the university forwards with alums doesn't somehow resonate with them. So when Matt and I were talking about the different goals that Claire had, recruitment of future JET participants. Do we all agree? Does that seem to be a consensus? A few less hands. Okay, there we go. A little bit more activity on that. All right, Matt, we're a little concerned there. All right, let's go on and take a look at another. Re-entry services, and this is something that I think I found of considerable synergy with what we think of. Re-entry services, what is that? Of course, JET participants have an amazing experience overseas. They're in Japan. They decide that they're going to re-enter into their host environment. how is it that the JET alumni can play a vital and strong role in assisting with that process? Cultural reorientation, job services, communication, fellowship. How is it that we transition these individuals that have a very intensive experience back into another environment? I could translate that into career services for alums and graduates and students. How is it that the alumni network of the University of Washington creates value for other alums and for students in terms of them pursuing the next stage in their life? That resonated with me. Does that resonate with you guys? Show of hands. Still a little thin. Okay, there we go. All right. How about another one? Cultural ambassador. I think this is the soft role. I think this is the easy role. I think this is the natural role. I, like you, spent a lot of years in and out of Japan over the last 15 years. You become this advocate, this ambassador, this evangelizer for how that experience that you've had in Japan transformed your life. I hope that every graduate of the University of Washington, how about a show of hands for UW grads here? Okay, only 2, my goodness. It's a great institution, I can tell. When I think about the 300,000 other alums that aren't in this room, I think about my goal that their passion, their interest, their understanding of the value of their experience, the information that they have, how they stay current on what the university is doing, how they're receiving information from me, from the Alumni Association, in such a way that when they're talking to their friends, to their networks, that they are great ambassadors for the university. With JET, I think that works on a couple of different levels. It's not just ambassador efforts for Japan in general, but for the JET program in specific. So I think that role is clearly something that we'd agree on. Wonderful. And the last one, the affinity with JET and that social fellowship and the connection that you have and how it is that you steward and you nurture those relationships. That's no different than when we talk about Husky Pride, and we talk about how these university experiences were a common experience that we all had at a certain time in our lives. That makes sense to me, and I'm assuming that that's a given with the individuals that are here today. One thing that I think is interesting about this model is if this forms the framework for why, for the question of why, and if the majority of your members and your leadership can agree that this framework, these values, and Matt, I'm assuming I've captured most of them.
Yeah.
Okay. If these values are something that there's agreement with, then I think there's a foundation for the JET Alumni Association to really build a bright future. The experience that we've had in the field of alumni associations, if there is any disagreement or any lack of alignment with these goals, or whichever goals your organization defines as the values, it's very difficult to create a sustainable effort. And what we do at the University of Washington is we identify our values and our goals, the priorities of the university, the interests of the university, and we attempt to build a bridge between the values of the alums. And if we can build a consensus there, then we have a team. And then we can go forward and do great things. So I would encourage you, as you're looking at structures and you're thinking about membership programs, maybe exploring membership dues, maybe looking at job descriptions, regulations. Matt gave a whole presentation about how do you make your budget requests. When you have all of the infrastructure that goes into an alumni association, if it's not grounded in some series of principles that answers the why question, all of that infrastructure becomes very bureaucratic and very cumbersome. And there's not a lot of passion that goes into that infrastructure. We were talking about Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, the other day at a retreat. And Collins lays out the 3 circles around what is it that you can be the best in the world at? What is it that you're passionate about? And what drives your resource engine? So when I think about the JET Alumni Association, what is it you can be the best in the world at? Well, you're the only organization that's going to be able to fulfill these efforts for Claire and for JET. You can be the best at the world at this. You're passionate about your experience in Japan and what JET means in the lives of young people and the lives of Japanese individuals and global relations, world peace through education, however you want to define that. And how you resource your engine to do that becomes the third part of the conversation. And I know that you're looking at different options with that. So I share this framework just to let you know that numerous alumni associations have struggled with finding clarity on these building blocks. It may seem very simple when you listen to it in the way that I've described, but there's a reason why hundreds of years of alumni associations have struggled with this, and we have multiple examples of antagonistic relationships between